I want you to pick up any random item that you have in your house. Most likely it is made in China or made in the area around China, such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Korea. Things being made in China aren't new. While Europe was in the Dark Ages, China was having a renaissance of sorts with lots of new inventions we still use today. Today we're going to talk about the Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, we do have another dynasty, the Sui Dynasty, but they really don't do anything, so we're going to move on to the Tang Dynasty, which happens next. The Tang Dynasty is going to bring back a lot of good things that were lost in the fall of the Han Dynasty, including the bureaucracy. The Tang also revived the scholarly gentry. Remember, the scholarly gentry is the upper class. Under the Tang Dynasty, we're going to see Confucianism expand, and we're going to see a comeback of Confucianism. Under the Tang Dynasty, we're going to have a tributary system. They conquer a lot of territory in Korea and Vietnam, and we're going to see those areas, in order to keep semi-independence, are going to give goods to the Tang Dynasty in order to, again, keep that independence. So remember, much like when we talked about Rome, where conquered areas had to pay tribute to Rome, the same thing is going on here under the Tang Dynasty. The Tang tried to implement something called the equal field system, which is totally different than the field system we talked about in Europe. This is a system where land is redistributed, so not all the land is held by the wealthy scholarly gentry. Land is redistributed evenly across, or semi-evenly across China. And this is going to be a good thing at first, but in the end, not so much, because it's going to isolate the scholarly gentry and make them upset. The Tang are going to decline for a number of reasons. One is that they neglect state affairs, so much like we see in Rome in the Han Dynasty, where they're more worried about their own luxuries and they don't take care of the problems going around in the country. Same thing's going to happen with the Tang Dynasty. We also see a weakening of the military, and that's going to lead to their downfall. We see peasant uprisings, and again, we don't have a strong military, and so those are going to be harder to control. The Tang are going to ask the nomads around China to help them to be a part of their military in order to suppress these uprisings. And remember, nomads are wandering people. They don't have allegiances to certain countries. And if you've learned anything from Rome, asking nomads to be a part of your army doesn't work out very well. And so this isn't going to work out for the Tang Dynasty either. The equal field system is going to backfire on them. It's not going to be as good economically as they had hoped, and again, it isolated the scholarly gentry. After the fall of the Tang, we see the Song Dynasty come in, and the Song are going to be much weaker than the Tang Dynasty was. They're going to have a weak political system, a weak military. They're going to be weak in dealing with nomads, so much so that instead of Korea and Vietnam paying tribute to the Song have to pay tribute to other kingdoms. Under the Song, a lot of power was held with the scholarly gentry and not so much with the emperors. We are going to see Confucianism promoted under the Song Dynasty, and a new type of Confucianism called Neo-Confucianism, which means New Confucianism, is going to come in. And this is Confucianism with some influence from Buddhism, and it's going to really stress traditional values. The Song Dynasty is going to fall for a lot of the same reasons that the Tang Dynasty did. They're not able to pay their tributes. They have bad economic conditions. They have peasant uprisings. You see, peasant uprisings is kind of a theme with falls of empires. The Song also have threats from the northern kingdoms, military threats, and since they don't have a strong military, they're not able to defend themselves. And eventually the Mongols are going to come in and take over after the fall of the Song Dynasty. I want to take a few minutes to talk about society and the culture and our new inventions under the Tang and Song Dynasty. They're kind of put together when we study these two dynasties because they're very similar. They came around the same time period, and so period 3 China is mainly going to be the Tang and Song Dynasty, and I always think of them as the inventors. That's when our great inventions are going to come in. So let's take a minute and talk about their societies. We see population growth under the Tang and Song Dynasties. Remember when we talked about the civil service system, or the merit-based system, where people were hired based on their qualifications? Well, we have a civil service exam that comes under the Tang and Song Dynasty that basically you take a test to see if you're qualified for these positions. So much like you take the ACT today to see if you're qualified to get into certain colleges, they had to take this test to see what their careers would be. And if you think the ACT is bad, boy, under the civil service exam, they had to be in a room for days at a time taking this test. So chill out the next time you have to take the ACT. I know taking a 5-hour test isn't your favorite thing, but you will survive. Go take a nap afterwards. The Grand Canal is going to be built during this time period, and it's going to connect northern China and southern China in trade. Remember, we don't have trains at this time period, we don't have trucks, we don't have airplanes, and so the best way to trade, or the fastest way to trade, was on water. And so this canal is going to connect the rivers in North and South China to make trade more efficient. We see China very involved in Indian Ocean and Silk Road trade during this time, and we have a new type of ships called junks, and yes, they are called that, which are much larger and much more efficient than our European ships are going to be under exploration, and they're going to be used primarily in the Indian Ocean waters for that trade. In the Silk Road trade, we're going to have something called flying monkeys, which is basically a letter of credit. One day, when you're an adult, you're going to buy a car or a house, and when you do so, you are going to want a good credit score, because that credit score will determine whether you A, get the loan, and B, what your interest rate is going to be. And so flying monkeys were kind of like that. They're kind of like a credit score. That was a letter of credit to see or to tell the person that you're buying things from that your word is good, that they can trust your word. This time period is known as the Golden Age of China because of all the inventions that came about under the Tang and Song Dynasty. One is porcelain, or china. When I got married, we got a lot of china, and it's called china because it came from China. It's porcelain from China. Another invention is gunpowder. And we're going to see gunpowder is going to be very revolutionary in European history. I mean, think of all the things you use gunpowder for. Fireworks and also different types of weapons are going to use gunpowder. Movable type is going to be invented during this time period. And movable type is kind of like the precursor to the printing press. And if you've ever seen a printing press, it's kind of like a big stamp. That's how we used to make documents or newspapers, is you'd have a bunch of different stamps of letters that you would move around to make words so that you could print them over and over again. So this is going to be a great invention because it means that we can mass produce documents instead of having to write them out by hand. So again, this is called movable type, and we'll see it again in Europe in the form of the printing press. The magnetic compass is created during this time period, and it's going to help sailors on their trade routes. Another invention is the abacus. Now, an abacus is kind of like an early calculator. So you are very lucky today that you have your TX whatever that you can use in math. But back in the day, if you wanted to do calculations or help with calculations, you used an abacus. And so that's going to be invented under the Tang and Song Dynasties. We are going to have a patriarchal society. Big surprise. But we're going to have a very strong patriarchal society under the Tang and Song Dynasty. We're going to see foot binding come about. And foot binding was a practice where little girls' feet would be broken and tied up over and over for basically the rest of their lives, and put in these little shoes in order to keep their feet from growing. This was done for a number of reasons. For one thing, if you've ever worn high heels or watched someone wear high heels, you notice that it emphasizes certain parts of your body that are more sexual. So this is a permanent high heel. Their feet were permanently in that position, and so it was more appealing to men. Another reason that they did foot binding was it's hard to walk, and so women were dependent on men for their livelihood. They couldn't go out and do anything for themselves or do a lot for themselves because it was harder to move with your feet like this. This was done not only to upper class women but lower class women as well. And we're going to see foot binding happen until the revolution in 1911. We also see women excluded from education during this time period, and you could get divorced, but divorce had to be a mutual agreement between the husband and the wife. So if the wife wanted a divorce and the husband said no, that's tough luck for her. We do see Chinese influence spread in this time period to Korea, Vietnam, and Japan, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next video. We have several types of religions or versions of religions that we already had in China at this time period. One is Pure Land Buddhism or Maharam Buddhism, which is a type of Buddhism that worships Buddha as a deity or as a god. We also have Zen Buddhism, which is more of your traditional Buddhism that enforces meditation and the natural wonders of the world. We're going to see Buddhism supported by the royal families. We're going to see mass conversions to Buddhism and a lot of influence in Chinese art and architecture and literature is going to be influenced by Buddhism. We are going to have an emperor, Emperor Wangzong, that doesn't like Buddhism, and there's going to be a backlash under him. We're going to see a lot of Buddhist temples destroyed. Okay, that does it for Tang and Song China. Next time we're going to talk about Chinese influence in Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. I'll see you then.